question is, how do you value that life experience? Because life experience is not valued. That ridiculous bit of paper in your CV, which says nothing about who you are, but that is how we are controlled, because we are completely controlled.
I'm Sonya Morton Firth, and you're tuned in to the Sonya Morton Firth Show. Explorer, adventurer, entrepreneur, and TEDx speaker. Today, my guest is Anthony Willoughby.
I think there are three types of people on this planet. There are those who are selfish and admit it to themselves. There are those who admit it to themselves and try to deceive others. And the third kind actually genuinely deceive themselves.
Anthony, thank you so much for being a guest in my home. And ever since we met a few weeks ago now when I attended one of your events, I have been dying to find out more about your life. But before we get into that, can you tell my audience who you are and in one sentence describe yourself?
Curious. And at school I was known as the missing link, which I now pride myself with, because I think one's always got to try to work out what is important in life. So I think it is curiosity, passion and courage to follow on one's dreams. That would be my abbreviated thoughts.
I love that, Anthony. And you've had very much a life of adventure. Can you tell me where it all started? What gave you that hunger?
I think it is zero acceptance within this country. And therefore I always had to leave. But basically I'm eighth generation expatriate. So as soon as I I was brought up in Africa, in the Sudan, in Egypt. And then as soon as I actually went off to school, I never fitted in. I could never work out what on earth was, why I was there. So fortunately when I was 18, my housemaster took me aside. He said, Anthony, let's get one thing absolutely clear. You are far, far too stupid to go to university. But basically, I then went off to the States. And that's when I started hitchhiking. And I've hitched about 40,000 miles around the world. I've hitched across the States. I've hitchhiked by private aircraft. And I'm still hitchhiking. And I love it, just being out on the open road. A couple of years ago, I hitched the Mombasa Road and all sorts of other stuff. So I'm still hitchhiking. And that's really taught me the incredible importance of being positive.
That's amazing, hitchhiking across all those miles around the world. What were you feeling at that time when you were hitching around the world?
Freedom and trust. And what it is, and even when my kids, there was a family reunion in Calgary. So I said to my kids, this is about 10 years ago, yeah, you come to the reunion, but you've got to hitchhike across from Toronto. So I insisted my two boys, they were about 21, 24, 3 at the time, so they actually had to hitchhike. And I taught them to hitchhike. We hitchhiked once from, in Bulgaria, we went skiing on a ski trip to Bulgaria, and I said, there's good news, bad news. They said, what's the bad news? I said, there's no snow. They said, so what's the good news? I said, I can teach you to hitchhike. Do you want to go to Istanbul or to Athens? Because now I think hitchhiking is the most incredible philosophy for life.
Tell me about the philosophy. Is there no fear behind that as well?
No, because it's got to be both sides. So in theory is the fear of both sides, but I've never had a bad experience. I've had one bloke put a clammy hand on my thigh once, so every time you hop in a car, you instantly go, God, the women around here, they're so beautiful, wow, you know, and that sort of cuts off any thoughts. But no, I mean, basically I hitched in the first 10 days of a hitch around America. I sort of went from Massachusetts all the way around Alabama, off to Colorado Springs, got back to Washington, D.C., hitchhiked down to Florida. And that was all in literally 10 days. So I thought, this is getting far too easy. So someone was taking me down to the Keys, and I said, oh, drop me off here. I'll go and hitchhike across I'll go and see if I can get a ride to the Bahamas. And I got 3 offers for rides to the Bahamas in a private plane.
And no, I guess part of, maybe part of the fear behind hitchhiking or even traveling would be, say, the lack of certainty.
I know, but that's the whole thing of life. And that's why I thoroughly enjoy COVID. I know I shouldn't say this.
Oh, gosh, wow. You mentioned the word. Go on.
No, because finally structure, stability, security, certainty are proven to be delusions of an ill-informed, uneducated mind. So everybody's been building their life on a total misperception. And therefore, so in the first 99.99% of human existence, we've had to adapt and we've had to know who we are. And it's only since civilization came along and they split power, wealth and status that we've made everybody completely lost as to what they're hunting, protecting and growing. And if you can make people unaware of who they are, then you can tax them because they're going to run out and want to buy baubles. And as soon as you can get people completely sort of on baubles, then you can control them. I mean, what I love is, I've had a training centre on the Great Wall of China, but what you had there is you had north of it, you had the Mongols and the nomads, and basically they've got an expression, the more you have, the less you are. And just by that attitude, you had a few 100,000 or a few million Mongolians could terrify the Chinese for 5,000 years to build 20,000 miles of walls because they didn't have the personal self-determination. They were all caught up in what they owned and not who they were. And that's what I think we've got to really focus on now, is understanding who we are, what we are hunting, protecting and growing in our lives.
I want to come back to that, but just before we do, you've mentioned China, you've mentioned America. Can you give me some of the highlights of your adventures around the world?
Yeah, I mean, basically I was brought up, as I say, in Africa. I was educated in England and the States for a year. And then when I had a stall on the Bayswater Road selling bamboo hair slides for a couple of years. And then I had got just enough money to get a one-way ticket to Japan on the Trans-Siberian Express. So that was back in 1973. So I caught the Trans-Siberian Express and arrived in Japan by boat. And I sort of liked it there. And I spent the next sort of 30 years living there. But from Japan, I started going off on different journeys. And on one of the journeys, I went on a camel safari in northern Kenya. And that's when I first saw the Maasai. And what I saw there, you had people who had substance without arrogance. And that's when I thought, my entire education is how can I be massively arrogant with minimum substance? And my school also only taught effortless insincerity. So I started to think, why on earth don't we get taught identity? Because they had identity. They had something that I thought, what is it? Why don't we have it? Why don't I have it? And that's when I went off to the Papua New Guinea embassy in Tokyo, met the ambassador, and I said, sir, what is it you've got that we've lost? And he said, I haven't got a clue. Why don't you go off to my village in the highlands of Papua New Guinea? So I said, right, I'll go off to the highlands of Papua New Guinea. And they were sort of running around with arse grass and huge axes and all sorts of tribal wars were going on. And I saw them with lots of feathers. So I said, so why do you have feathers? They said, well, a big man has many feathers, but a bigger man can hand out his feathers.
I like that. Can you repeat that?
Yeah,
Sorry, I love
that. A big
that.
man has many feathers. A bigger man can hand out his feathers. And therefore the entire status is on how you contribute to others. Because you have to earn the feathers, you can't take them. So I said, okay, what else is important? They said, well, the spear is very important. You can't buy it, you can't sell it, you can't give it away. You have to accept the responsibility that comes with the spear. So again, I thought of all the people in Tokyo I knew had director on their name card, but nobody would listen to them because they'd never earned it. So I started to see the link between what we'd lost. And then I said, what else is important? And they said, well, the shield is important. But that's not just your own protection, it's people who will protect you. So I started to see this balance. You've got to hand out your feathers, you've got to have a shield to protect others. And that's how you earn your position at the fire. When I got back to Tokyo, I said to the ambassador, I remember sort of thinking, because I went to the loo and I thought, I've got the question for him. What is the most important thing in your life? And what I thought he would say, my car, my house or something, he said, he looked at me, banged on the table and said, it is my territory. And he then drew a map, and on that map, he drew his entire world and his culture, and he could then explain why and every decision was made. These are our friends, these are our enemy, this is how we call people. So I became fascinated by that, because I thought, what is my territory? A couple of bars where women are friendly in Tokyo. So I thought, why? What is my territory? And that's when I sort of started going off on my different journeys and expeditions, which included climbing a 7,000-meter mountain in Western China without porters and oxygen, and I'd been across Papua New Guinea.
Without porters and oxygen.
Yeah.
So what was going through your mind at that stage, and how did you get through
I was
it?
vaguely hallucinating at the top. I mean, it's fairly high, so sort of in the death zone,
Yes.
but we weren't there for that long. But no, much to my amazement, I got to the top. But I've been on this expedition across Papua New Guinea because I'd seen a book called Flight of Sepik Rivers, so I thought I'll walk it. And the ambassador, we got pissed with some SP breweries, and he drew this line across the map and said, "Follow this." I said, "Yes, sir." So I saw there were villages, so I thought, well, food is not going to be a problem, but wine might be. So we turned up with 24 bottles of wine and no food.
I love it, Anthony. Just the sort of expedition I'd be wanting to go on.
But one bloke just complained every step of the way. And what I saw is a complainer completely destroys morale.
So tell me, let's go on, because people do complain. We all complain. We're all, especially as you say, in COVID times, we were complaining left, right, and centre. And I know I'm guilty of it. I wake up and I complain to myself sometimes, but I catch myself. And I try and reframe it and change the way I look at something.
Observations are fine. Understated observations are fine. So it's cold today. 2 of my toes have just turned black. That is an observation. But it's just this, because basically complainers are cowards. They will never confront you face on. They will always go round and try to undermine you.
So what was your biggest challenge on all these adventures?
Well, I once got pissed trying to impress a woman and climbed out of a window in China and thought it'd be quite funny to come back through the other window and fell and paralysed myself from the second story. So that was sort of quite an interesting experience.
And weren't you a bullfighter at some point?
I was a bullfighter, yeah. Well, basically...
I don't think I've ever had a bullfighter here.
Well,
they
were fairly small bulls, but they did knock me around a bit. And I did actually turn up a Duque de Pino Hermoso's estancia in north of Madrid. And he let me loose on some small bulls. I mean, they had horns about that size, but even then, you can sort of do it. But, doing them a letter and mucking around with bulls. So I did, but I got knocked over a couple of times. I probably spent, half an hour with bulls or something like that. And I realised that I'm just not up to it.
That wasn't your thing.
Well, the degrees of stupidity that...
Anthony, it strikes me that you've just in the brief moments that we've had, you've certainly had a life less ordinary. But there's something in that. What is your mindset and what have you really learnt about yourself through all these adventures?
It's all around myself. I mean, everything is selfish. I mean, I think there are 3 types of people on this planet. There are those who are selfish and admit it to themselves. There are those who admit it to themselves and try to deceive others. And the third kind actually genuinely deceive themselves. So I think one has to realize that everything was God as a self-interest. So my book here, In Search of Inspiration, if I can just sort of read the opening line, but, I believe the greatest challenge and opportunity in my life so far has been the freedom of choice to shape my own destiny. And mine is probably the first generation since our ancestors left the cave to have many of those freedoms. And therefore, what I've tried to look at is my quest is to discover what I must understand about myself, human nature, and the laws of Mother Nature, if I want my freedom of choice to supply me with the same sense of inspiration and fulfillment and identity. Clearly, money has been one of my liberators, but it alone has not been able to answer my questions. So that is everything I've always been doing, is to try to look at really what maintains my peace of mind. And that's about 30 years ago. I was going out with a girl called Sue. Now it's 40 years ago. I've been married 30 years. 40 years ago, I was going out with a girl called Sue. And Sue I thought I was, God's gift. So I flew off to Singapore and sort of left her in Tokyo. And I got to Singapore and I wrote her a letter in those days, or called her and said, "Sue, come and join me." She said, "Bugger off." So I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink, I couldn't sleep, I was absolutely useless. So I thought, what is it? I've got my freedom, but I haven't got anything left. So what I did is I came up with my peace of mind chart. On my peace of mind chart, which I can sort of show here, I started to look at missing Sue, desire to fly to Tokyo, feeling of acceptance, sense of belonging, desire to go skydiving. And what I started to realize was if I played a good game of rugby or went skydiving, my desire to marry Sue dropped dramatically. Basically, I then had belonging and recognition And I then trusted myself. And what I realized that if I was in that state of mind, my needs and wants completely changed. So therefore, your sense of belonging and recognition leads to your needs and wants are completely controlled by your sense of belonging and recognition.
Now, I spend a lot of time talking to veterans, and I have a lot of veterans on my show. And what I found talking to them is when they come out of the military, they suffer, not all of them, but a lot of them suffer because they've lost that sense of belonging.
Correct.
They've lost that sense of community and camaraderie with the rest of their...
Totally, because they've got no identity, and that's the whole problem. And that's the whole thing. The question is, what are you going to be doing tomorrow? And that's why I love the Maasai and the other tribes I've stayed with, is this transition. Because if you're with the Maasai, the values of respect, responsibility, and courage are consistent through your life, but your authority, responsibility, and accountability changes. So you move from being the warrior when you've got to protect the cattle to becoming the elder where you're given the stick of wisdom. Because therefore your responsibility changes. And they have a phenomenal 5-day ceremony or even longer to tell people how their authority has changed. And therefore, but they've got the community to contribute to, because they've always got the values of the community. But when you left corporate life or you leave the army, your responsibility is completely changed. And therefore so is your identity, because it doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist.
And that's why I want to train people to think about their peace of mind, which is what are they hunting, protecting, and growing in their life? Because if you know that, then you've got that consistent.
So let's translate this, Anthony, because playing devil's advocate, this sounds amazing. And having a life adventure, going around the planet, living with different indigenous cultures. I'm sure a lot of people would love that. But they may be sitting here or listening to this and thinking, well, that's all very well and good, but we need money to survive. So how are we going to do all these wonderful things if we don't have money?
So I think it's more around the values that you've got in your own life. You do not have to go traveling around the world. You do not have to go and stay in 5-star hotels. You just have to be nice to the person next door. Because I think it's how one leads one's life on a daily basis that is one sense of satisfaction. It's not where you've been. I've just been very, very lucky to have different lessons. But I, talk to the vets. They've got far more life experience than I have. The question is, how do you value that life experience? Because life experience is not valued. That ridiculous bit of paper in your CV, which says nothing about who you are, but that is how we are controlled, because we are completely controlled.
Well, I think that's what it comes down to. We are controlled. Our minds are controlled, and that starts very early on in life with our education system, and then we become, I think we're slave to our parents, whatever their wishes are, and then we become slaves to the education system, and 9 times out of 10, maybe 8 times out of 10, now you go to a corporate and you become slaves of the corporation.
You are, but it's total enslavement. I mean, I've looked, each household in England has basically got 63,000 quid of debt. The debt in this country is 1.3 trillion. So that is simply enslavement. And, but I think for sort of happiness, I mean, one thing I think I mentioned earlier, but my father, when I asked him, so how should I educate my children? He simply said, make sure they play sports at which they can get seriously hurt. But his other sort of thing in life was, a little danger keeps you up to scratch.
I love that. A little danger keeps you up to scratch.
And he sort of described he was a soldier on the northwest frontier in India in the 30s. And he said, just enough officers were getting killed to make soldiering interesting. And again, going back to COVID, I think just enough people are dying to make living pretty interesting.
Wow, that is quite a statement. I love it, actually. You know what? It's a bold statement, but it's true, because it's all made us question our mortality. It certainly made me question my mortality and what I want to do with the rest of my life, what makes me happy. And I think one thing that did teach us was materialistic things mean nothing if you haven't got the connection with your loved ones, your closeness to people, and having your freedom going out the house.
Correct, and then you see what's going on in the Ukraine, and you've got the leader there who's on the streets leading people with courage, and everybody looks at it. but it's using those ancient words that we've got to, this is what we're protecting, our identity and our dignity, and these are the things that nobody can take away. So it's one's invisible wealth that I believe is far more important.
So how does all this translate into your Nomadic School of Business? Tell me a little about that.
Having climbed the 7,000-meter mountain, this is back in '86, well, I thought I'd opened the first outdoor team building center in Japan. And then we opened on the Great Wall of China. And people would come along, they would do all sorts of exercises, outdoor activities, and they go, wow, we're an amazing team, but where do I belong? Where am I recognized? And I thought every time I've been with a tribe, they've got absolute clarity of who they are. So I started thinking, what has a tribe got that a corporate hasn't got? And what I came up with the idea was maybe it's territory. So I thought maybe actually it's not around the trust. What's more important is knowing your territory. So for the last 20 years, I've asked thousands of people to draw maps of how they see their corporate territory. And what I realized is then, because basically everybody's a different map. So in a corporation, there's absolutely no context to any conversation because everybody sees a different river and a different mountain and a completely different perspective. So the map gets a common language. But what I realized is giving people the map, it helps with the conversation and create interest, but everybody's got a different sort of meaning for the icon. And that's why now what I've really done is to simplify stuff down to really 10 icons with the Nomadic School of Business. Now these are relevant to the nomads of Mongolia, where I spend a lot of time, or with the nomads of East Africa. It's exactly the same thing. It's what are you hunting, what are you protecting, and what are you growing?
So you're translating this into the Western world.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, you've got Darwin saying, you know, it's not survival of the fittest. It's actually survival of the most adaptable. I actually believe it is the species that can balance hunting, protecting, and growing. We've got to go back to when our brain was last rewired. And that's about 35,000 years ago, when we started hunting mammoths and we could start working in smaller groups. We could have build shelters out of the skins because we knew how to work together. And I think that's about the capability of our brain. I mean, I've been reading it, and you've got Nigel Nicholson, you know, who says you can take the caveman out, you can take the man out of the cave, but you can't take the caveman out of the man. And I think this is just so true. And that's why I think we've got to simplify stuff. And what I've discovered, which I'm most fascinated by, is everybody can talk about the rivers, mountains, and swamps. So what I've done is I've looked at all of the icons that people have drawn over the years, and that's how I've simplified them down.
So you're taking us back all of those years. What legacy do you want to leave behind, Anthony?
Well, basically, when I set up I Will Not Complain, I wanted to, I believe that the currency of the future will be trust and willpower. So that is still my legacy. If we can give people to trust themselves, trust others, and trust Mother Nature, and to have the courage and determination to do something of contribution.
I think I love that.
Because the whole thing is, how do you earn your respect around the fire?
And yet today we still see people earning their respect by showing off their materialistic...
And go for it. But I mean, but it doesn't really, you know, the question is, you know, what are they actually contributing around the fire? Who do they have around the fire? Well, they have lots of other people who are just like them. So they listen to people who've got the same ideas. But I think there's a gradual shift, and that's what I'm trying to get across. Of how do you create that shift? But it's not me telling anybody anything. I simply give people a blank sheet of paper and say, please imagine you're a Stone Age man or woman. What are you hunting on that map? Where do you see your rivers? And people will start drawing. And it's absolutely fascinating.
Anthony, we could talk all day, but I think we've just about run out of time. So,
well, thank you very much.
Just on my last question, though, and I think you've sort of answered it, but if you were to meet your younger self again, what piece of advice would you give to him, knowing what you know now?
Keep pushing those doors that are slightly ajar. And if I can just give a tiny bit of background, it was when I was at school, and I went to see Hair, which was a show in London with the first naked women and all the rest. And I had my Spotmatic with me, my camera. And I went backstage to the stage door. and it was slightly ajar. And I sort of pushed it open a tiny bit and looked round, thinking they'd told me to go away. They said, "No, come on in." And I came in, so I mean, literally, Elaine Page still was got using my photographs on her website of her early days. So I became the unofficial hair photographer.
Just by pushing
the door, and that's the same philosophy of hitchhiking. And I think the thing is, we've just got to push all the different doors open. That's what I do. I don't know what I would have done differently. I mean, I certainly would have done financial things differently. But then I don't think I'd have done what I've done. So what is that balance?
And you've done a tremendous amount, Anthony. You really have. I've really enjoyed this interview. Thank you so much.
Oh, forgive me talking so much.
No. Come again. Come for tea again.
Thank you.
Thank you for being a guest on my show, Anthony.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hope you enjoyed the show. Remember, there's a new interview out every Monday. So hit subscribe and like, and you'll get it straight into your inbox.